Hello and welcome back to All You Need Notes for Edexcel IGCSE History, and this is the fifth and final video in the USA topic for Paper 2. This covers the opposition to the New Deal, so all the alphabet agencies and the things we looked at in the last video. I'll be showing you two key features of everything listed in the specification, which for this part of the topic isn't that long at all. There's only 5 things, so let's get on with it. Firstly is the Supreme Court opposition to the New Deal. The first key feature is that the Supreme Court closed down alphabet agencies. So the Supreme Court was made up of several judges, 9 judges, who were appointed by the president. So if the president was a Republican, they would appoint judges who sympathised with the Republican Party, and if the president was a Democrat, they would appoint judges who were sympathetic to the Democrats. So a lot of the judges on the Supreme Court at the time Roosevelt was in power were sympathetic to the Republicans, and this meant that they were against lots of Roosevelt's New Deal ideas, especially alphabet agencies. For example, they said that alphabet agencies were unconstitutional. They had they wielded too much power over the state governments. So state governments weren't able to rule and decide ideas for themselves. So the Supreme Court was trying to say that Roosevelt and the federal government, so the government that ruled over all the states in America, was growing too powerful and was limiting the ability and the power of each individual state. They agreed, for example, that the NRA, which was the alphabet agency which made businesses give workers better conditions, more wages and better working hours, they said that they would have no control over trade, and that the AAA, which managed farms and helped to stop overproduction, they said that this and the act that was involved with it could not be forced on states, as this was against the Constitution. So all they were trying to argue is that the federal government and Roosevelt was trying to have too much power. The second key feature is that Roosevelt tried to get a majority in the Supreme Court. So because judges were appointed by the president, in 1937 he asked Congress to add 6 more judges to the Supreme Court, and he would appoint obviously judges that were aligned to his views, the Democrat views, in order to give him a majority of supporters in the Supreme Court. So if more judges supported him, therefore they wouldn't be closing down his alphabet agencies or limiting their power. And this practice of adding more judges, just keeping on adding more judges until they all agree with your idea, was called court packing, and it was quite typical of a dictatorship. So Congress refused it, but 2 of the judges who were already on the Supreme Court and who had been voting against all the alphabet agencies decided now to start backing Roosevelt. They realised that Roosevelt would keep on trying to add judges, or he'd find some way to make all the judges, or get a majority in the Supreme Court, to support him, and therefore they just decided to back him anyway to save him the trouble. And this meant that Roosevelt finally got a majority in the Supreme Court. The second thing to look at then is Republican opposition, so opposition from the Republican Party. The first key feature is that the Republicans disagreed fundamentally with the Democrats, and still do to this day, really. The Republicans disliked Roosevelt, and they disliked the federal government, both of whom were gaining too much power over individual states. They were putting out all these agencies and all these acts and laws that was limiting the ability of states to rule themselves and set laws for themselves. And they also hated, and crucially, spending so much money, for example, on all these construction programs and Works Progress Administration, all these alphabet agencies that he'd set up and was spending billions of dollars on in order to improve American life. They didn't like this because he was borrowing the money, or he was increasing taxes in order to pay for the money, especially taxes on the wealthy. And this was against the Republicans' ideas of low tax and limited borrowing, so they thought that he was being financially reckless. The second key feature is that the Republicans gained power in Congress. So in 1938, there had been a recession, people were suffering, and the Republicans decided to campaign against Roosevelt and blame everything that was happening on him. And so because of this, they got more votes and they gained more seats in Congress. And they formed a coalition with some of the Democrats from the southern states, so those who are a bit more sympathetic to the Republicans. The southern states were seen as a bit more on the Republican side, so even if they had elected Democrats, they would have similar ideas to some of the Republicans. And this group voted to cut spending on work relief programs. So, for example, the CCEA, which had given 500,000 jobs to unemployed young people. They also blocked any further New Deal measures and wanted to investigate some of the alphabet agencies for having too much power. The third one then is business opposition and the Liberty League. The first key feature is that businessmen disagreed with the New Deal, or lots of them did. Businessmen disliked the government being too powerful. Again, all of them, the Supreme Court Republicans and the businesses, did not like the federal government having too much power. They disliked the high taxes as well, in order to fund all the New Deal programs, as we looked at, and they preferred what we would term a laissez-faire attitude, so just letting the market sort itself out, very, very much like Hoover, so not too much state intervention, well, federal intervention. They didn't like the government funding all these things. They also hated the NRA, who was setting working hours and paying conditions for workers, and the Wagner Act, which allowed unions to challenge businesses. They thought that both of these granted workers too much power, and the federal government weren't working with businessmen and weren't on the businessmen's side, and therefore they were against the New Deal. The second key feature of this is that the Liberty League was set up in order to paint Roosevelt as anti-business. So the American Liberty League was founded in 1934, and they distributed leaflets, they broadcast speeches, and they tried to show that the New Deal and Roosevelt was a threat to the power of individual states and was anti-constitutional and was limiting the power of businesses. However, it wasn't really a success. Only 150,000 people joined it, and it was closed in 1940 after the Supreme Court began to back Roosevelt. So the Liberty League had been involved in trying to challenge some of the alphabet agencies in court, but the Supreme Court was now backing Roosevelt, so that was hopeless. And so it didn't really come to much. Now, onto something a little bit different. So far we've looked at some opposition to the New Deal from the right, from the Republicans. Now we're going to have a look at some from the left. So beginning with Huey Long and the Share Our Wealth programme. The first key feature is that Long believed that the New Deal wasn't going far enough. So Huey Long was a senator, and he said, for example, that the NRA was controlled by big business. So the NRA, which was responsible for helping workers and making their conditions and their pay go up, was actually on the side of big business. The AAA, which was involved in helping farmers and making sure overproduction didn't happen in order to increase their profits, he claimed that the AAA left poor farmers homeless, and that there was too big a gap between rich and poor Americans. He also felt that the Social Security Act, which had created insurance for the unemployed, so allowed them, so gave them money if you were unemployed in order to help your family and feed them. He said that this didn't go far enough, and too many Americans were poor and it was struggling if they were unemployed. So this was a left-leaning critic, so more on the left than Roosevelt was. A second key feature is that Long set up the Share Our Wealth programme. So he founded this in 1934, and it aimed to take part of the income of wealthy Americans and give that money to poor Americans, so like a Robin Hood scheme. So it aimed to give poor Americans $2,500 per year at a minimum in order to help them. And around 8 million people joined the Share Our Wealth clubs across America. So his proposals were radical, and to some extent they've been quite popular. However, Long was shot in 1935, and so the clubs closed down shortly after that. The programme never went far, and it wasn't a success. And the final one to look at then, the Father Coughlin's social justice campaign. The first key feature of this is that Father Coughlin spread his messages on the New Deal. So Coughlin was a Catholic priest who was based near Detroit, and his sermons were broadcast via the radio to 30 million listeners across America. And he gave political opinions in his sermons, which were taken seriously by the public and also, of course, by politicians, because the public was easily swayed by them. And he initially had supported the New Deal, so this had boosted votes for Roosevelt when he was saying that it was a good thing, so people were more likely to vote for the Democrats. The second key feature is that Coughlin set up the National Union for Social Justice. So Coughlin claimed that the Depression had been caused by the bankers on Wall Street, and he wanted banking reforms and more fair taxes, so a better taxation system, and reforms to the banking system to stop something like that ever happening again. He campaigned in November 1934 to nationalise the US economy by setting up the National Union for Social Justice. However, many of his ideas, like banking reforms and fairer taxation, were realised in the Second New Deal, and therefore, what he campaigned for had happened, and so his influence declined after the Second New Deal. And that is all the opposition to the New Deal. And that sums up the series of videos on the USA topic from 1918 to 41 for the Paper 2 exam. And that picture there is Huey Long from the Share Our Wealth programme. So that's all you need notes for Edexcel IGCSE history on the USA. I will also soon publish some videos about how to answer the Paper 2 questions for Section A, which covers the USA topic. But thank you very much for watching. If this has helped you, please do comment and let me know. And I'll see you in those videos. Goodbye.